Do you expect them to have similarly dramatic moves, or is there a major rotation that you're expecting?
Well, John, we've already witnessed this happen in large caps. NVIDIA has risen 40% in 8 trading days. So when someone says the Russell 2000, which is made of even cheaper companies, can't rise 40% in the next 5 months, they're forgetting that we've already seen huge moves in the mega caps. I don't think the mega caps have to go down.
Do you expect it to happen in isolation with the small caps is what I'm getting? I know that NVIDIA has done that. Some other stocks have done that themselves. But if you're talking about all of the small, the small caps as an index moving up that much, what do these other things do?
Well, I think that a 40% move in small caps doesn't mean the rest of the market goes down. I just think that's going to highlight that the market is broadening, which is something we all expect, but it's also basically doing a risk-reward analysis, which is, look, I think if you can get 18% earnings growth and pay 10 times earnings, perhaps that's a good risk-reward. And I think money that's on the sidelines or people who've been thinking bonds are going to be and cash is the place you want to stick for the next 5 years, but if the Fed starts cutting, they're going to look for places where there's good risk reward, and I think that's small caps. Do
you need dramatic cuts for that thesis to pan out? Or are there other potholes in the road that you see that threaten your thesis?
Well, a recession would be negative. I don't think the Fed has to make major cuts. It actually just has to. I think the market narrative that would be the best for small caps is the belief that real interest rates are too tight now. 5.5% versus inflation trending towards 2%, and getting rates back down to a neutral rate of 3%. If the market believes that, they don't need the cuts to be front-end loaded, but they have to believe we're going back towards neutral. I think that'd be a huge catalyst for small caps.
Okay, now let me ask you about more about mega caps and about the consumer. How important, not necessarily just to small caps, but to the whole market narrative, will NVIDIA earnings next week be?
Well, NVIDIA is really important because it's underpinning really what is driving the U.S. economy, which is a real push towards productivity, using basically digital tools and automation. That's a very important disinflationary trend. And of course, the U.S. companies, all of the big ones are all the U.S. I mean, it's a global phenomenon that benefits U.S. companies. So I think it's incredibly important. But NVIDIA, trading at 26 times forward earnings isn't that demanding a stock either. So it's not like I would say sell NVIDIA to buy small caps. I think NVIDIA is still a long-term buy.
Now, what about the holiday season and the consumer who's very stretched, particularly the working class consumer? What kinds of numbers perhaps did you expect to see at the beginning of that season? Oftentimes that can set the tone for how retail stocks and some other things perform.
Yeah, the consumer is under stress. I mean, it's known that things that are high interest rate, like credit card, auto loans, HELOCs, adjustable rate mortgages, these are all subject to Fed policy. It's been a very penalty rate for consumers when inflation's coming down and they're paying these very high rates. So cutting rates would be a tailwind. Falling gasoline would be helpful as well. And I think the third is CEO confidence and has been put on hold as long as the Fed's been tight. If the Fed starts to signal a rate cutting cycle, I think businesses will start to be more expansionary, and that's good for consumers as well.
All right. We'll see what happens. Tom Lee from FundStrat, thank you. Speaking of the Fed, after the break, we just mentioned NVIDIA's big rally off the lows, and NYU's Dean of Valuation, Aswath Damodaran, thinks it's now overvalued. He's going to join us to make that case next. And NVIDIA has made an impressive comeback of its own, trading near record levels. Is that rally and the broader market bounce justified? Well, joining us now is Aswath Damodaran, Wall Street's Dean of Valuation, Professor of Finance at the NYU School of Business. Always good to see you. So NVIDIA looks stretched. Does that mean you sell it?
I think it's a dangerous game to play. If you don't own it, the only way you can sell it is to short the stock, and that's a recipe for disaster, especially leading into an earnings report. And the way to think about NVIDIA is, are you a trader? In which case, you buy at a low price and sell at a high price, and NVIDIA might be the game you want to play. Are you an investor? Where you're buying based on earnings and cash flows? NVIDIA is an amazing company, great growth, amazing cash flows, superb margins, but you're paying a premium price even given all of those pluses. So I think you've got to be honest with yourself about the game you came to play.
So, and broaden that out for the whole market. You make an interesting point here. You say hubris is the greatest sin in investing, the excessive pride. And when people use the word bubble, it tends to be a sign of hubris. Explain.
I think that when you use the word bubble, you're essentially arguing that the rest of the market has lost its mind. And that, to begin with, is a sign of an ego that's out of control. When you think something is overvalued, all it means is you think it's overvalued. It doesn't mean it's overvalued. It doesn't mean you have the truth. You have your truth and you got to act on it, but the rest of the world has their own truth. So my view on investing is make your own judgments, but don't pass judgment on other people buying or selling stocks because you don't like what they pay.
So in your judgment, among some of the mega cap stocks, what's a better deal right now?
I think Amazon is a better deal than NVIDIA as an investor. If you wanted to go with the mega tech, I think Amazon is a better buy than NVIDIA. It might not play out that way as a trade, but I think given the earnings and the cash flows, if I had to buy a stock now and you force me to buy a big tech, I would rather own Amazon or buy Amazon than buy NVIDIA right now.
How are you valuing small cap stocks, which have performed not as well as mega cap names that we've been discussing so far? And when should investors, not traders, but investors, start charting out narratives that make sense to them where those are concerned?
I think a lot of people believe in mean reversion, which is they assume that if small caps have underperformed for a while, they've got to come back. I'm going to posit that there's been an economic shift, that the way the economy is structured is you have more winner-take-all businesses, which effectively put smaller companies at a disadvantage. So one reason why I think small cap stocks have underperformed larger cap stocks, not just over the last few months, but over the last decade, is because the market seems to have come to that realization as well. It might have overcorrected, and there might be some kind of a reversion back at least to a more normal pricing. But I'm going to argue that those people who expect the old small cap premium, small caps historically have delivered higher returns than large caps to come back, might be barking up the wrong tree.
We have a quarter next week that is way too big, looming, NVIDIA. And there's too many people in NVIDIA right now. Like, you know, I went to I had our great charity event. Thank you for Sag Harbor Cinema.
Yes.
And thank you for inviting me and the table. And there are people there who just said, look, NVIDIA has made my life. Well, no, it hasn't unless you sell some. NVIDIA's not made your life yet. And then we had a guy last night, a caller, who just said, look, after NVIDIA, I was going to name my dog Chewy. And I said, what are you, like, I'm shorting your dog, you know? I mean, what are you doing with it? But like, Chewy, okay, farmer's dog. So I just think there's just too much on the line. Look, that's not negative. It just says, look, there's too much on the line.
Yeah, take a look at it. You mentioned the semis here. For the group, 22% in 10 days.
But that's just unbelievable.
It's going to be the
best. I remember, like, in 1984, there was this rally in Texas Instruments, and there used to be this machine it was in Grand Central Station. I used to hog it. There were people behind me, get out. But I was just hitting up Texas Instruments calls, and it would be like, wow, this thing is just a juggernaut. It'd be monolithic memories. There were all these things, all these semis, and after a while, like, we were just bidding up the same stocks over and over again. And it was on the idea that maybe we were going to go digitized, not analog. And I just, after a while, overstayed my welcome. Except for Motorola. That one I didn't overstate because they pivoted to cell phone. I don't have something new that will make me take it up, so I'm just now playing multiple expansion. And NVIDIA's got too much water to carry. I think it's going to be fantastic, and then I think that the guide may not be satisfactory. Because I don't know what you have to do to just, this is a huge rally. And remember, talk about double top. I mean, this would be the one because that last top was so ugly. I mean, it was just up huge and then boom down, which is textbook. So my feeling about NVIDIA. I want to own it. I want to trade it. But I do recommend that people look at what it's done. I mean, look at the August low. Look at now. What a comeback! Boom. You know, what a comeback.
It is incredible.
NVIDIA. Take the election back to November. We still have next week NVIDIA earnings on the 28th. The importance of that day for this market now, given what the market's done and what NVIDIA's done, is what?
So I think most of the folks who come on this show have probably forgotten more about NVIDIA than I will ever know. But what I would say is I still think it's as high profile a stock as there is in the marketplace. It is still the number 2 weight in the index, rounding up to 7%. And so I think it matters hugely, particularly in a week that otherwise would probably be pretty quiet and pretty illiquid. I think it's going to be a show me story, of course, not just as it relates to revenues and net income, but what is the status of Blackwell? And I think the more important takeaway is what does it tell us about the AI narrative regarding AI spend and AI CapEx? And I think I would say this, for much of the past 2 years, the AI narrative was profoundly bullish and essentially one way. Now you've opened up kind of the other side of the debate around the ROI, around the ROIC. And so I think the market's going to want to get a waypoint that tells you the spend is still there and companies are going to deliver that ROI sooner than later.
Now we got to show me, right?
Now you gotta show me.
Like spending's up 40 to 50% year on year, representing exactly what you said, this new trend. But at some point, investors got to see the payoff.
That's right.
You can't just have hope and a prayer.
That's right. And so I think the bigger setup for mega cap tech, which has been the biggest part of my framework for the past couple of years, it has been a keep your eye on the ball story, is I think relative to the hottest moments of June or July, I think the shine is off the space a little bit. Why? Because the eye-popping nature of these beats is a little bit less than it had been in the prior year and a half. I think we all know, and this is well narrated, the forward earnings premium of the 7 versus the 493 is set to narrow pretty considerably. And again, the AI narrative is a little bit more two-sided. I still don't want to lose lose that anchor point in these stocks. If they deliver 18%, if the Mag 7 delivers 18% earnings growth next year, on top of the buyback, on top of the CapEx, I still think it's a good story. It's just a more demanding setup than it's been.
Do you still see these stocks as, quote, sword and shield, as you described them several times in the past? You're able to play offense, but you're also playing defense because of the balance sheet, the CapEx, the buybacks. In some cases now we're even talking dividends like we were not before.
I do. Big picture, I do think it's still elements of sword and shield. And again, 18% earnings growth next year will feel a little bit anticlimactic relative to the fireworks of recent years, but still well above the 493. I still think they're the biggest and the best balance sheets in the world. And like I said, they're generating an immense amount of capital. They're returning that in the form of buybacks and dividends, and they're reinvesting that on a level that no other company can touch.
You have August 28th circled on your calendar as an NVIDIA shareholder?
100%, Scott. I mean, and we've heard all the CapEx spending. Tony alluded to it earlier, from all the hyperscalers. And I think that will ring true. It will show up in the numbers for NVIDIA. And I think it will be, and obviously we've seen the price action, right? How quickly the stock got bought up since the carry trade unwind, in the early part of August. So for me, I think we're going to see some really solid numbers, and I'm looking forward to it.
Make or break for the near term for mega cap? Right, depending on what NVIDIA says? Or no? Is that overstating it?
It's important. And even if you look at what the futures imply about how the market could move that day, it's on par with Fed meetings. It's on par with CPI data. It's on par with jobs data. So it's a big deal. It would be wrong to say it's not.
Especially given the comeback from 2 Mondays ago.
Right.
It's just been remarkable.
There's a little bit more doubt is on the mega cap tech front. Now, we've had some healthy earnings so far from the July end tech companies with Cisco and Palo Alto. But NVIDIA is going to be crucial as we get a sense of, whether or not the very aggressive AI data center spending is going to continue in the second half of this calendar year. We're going to get an update on their Blackwell chip that's going to ship in time at the end of this calendar year. It's going to be delayed a little bit. So I think that's the NVIDIA report. And then we also have a lot of other AI names like Dell and Marvell next week also. And those are going to be Dell's next week. And those are going to be crucial data points for the tech trade.
All right, I hope you're all having a great Tuesday. And now let's talk about NVIDIA and the rest of the market. The S&P closed down roughly 0.2% while NVIDIA closed the day down about 2.1% following yesterday's gain of roughly 4.3%. As I mentioned in yesterday's video, I thought we may have a relatively flat day today after having such a strong day yesterday and breaking above this resistance trend line. I was looking for us to come back down to test the trend line as support, and we did earlier today in pre-market trading. It was odd how it unfolded though. We were looking fine this morning until shortly before market open NVIDIA quickly moved below the trend line, and so we opened stand underneath the trend line, battling it as resistance rather than support. Now, I don't know what the future holds and anything could happen. I could be completely wrong. With that in mind, I think NVIDIA could potentially trade lower in the short term, and let me briefly explain why. First, I want to point out that this support trend line actually stretches all the way back to January of this year. And so, although it is possible, I would be surprised if NVIDIA moved all the way back down to that trend line in the short term. It is possible, but I would be surprised if that were to happen between now and earnings. Zooming out to the daily time frame, I'm now watching to see if NVIDIA will come back down to the 50-day moving average and test it as support. The 50-day MA is the purple line on your screen, and on the daily time frame, this moving average is a very powerful indicator. We recently broke above the 50-day MA, and although we came close to testing it as support, we technically did not touch the 50-day MA before trading higher, so now I am waiting to see if we will retest that moving average sometime in the near future. Additionally, you can see on the histogram that we were experiencing growing momentum for multiple days, even back on August 14th. When we had a slight red day, we were still seeing growing momentum show up on the MACD and the histogram. Today, though, that growing momentum has apparently slowed on the daily time frame, at least for now, so I would not be surprised if NVIDIA trades lower in the short term. At the same time, though, we have to keep an eye on the macroeconomic situation because, as I've been saying for many videos now, NVIDIA's price action between now and earnings will be largely dependent on the rest of the market, and we have some important macro events happening this week. So tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, we get Fed minutes. Market participants will be picking these minutes apart, looking for any indication of Fed rate cuts on the horizon. We then get initial jobless claims and flash PMI on Thursday, and then of course we have Fed Chair Jerome Powell's speech at Jackson Hole on Friday. The market will be watching Powell like a hawk this Friday, listening in for any indication of a Fed rate cut in September. I think if Powell very clearly communicates that rate cuts are coming in September, and possibly even hints at more rate cuts coming later this year, then I think the market rallies in the short term following Jackson Hole. However, if Powell is very vague and doesn't clearly set up a rate cut in September, then I think market participants could start to feel nervous, and we could have some volatility and possibly trade lower in the short term, especially so considering that the market is trading so close to all-time highs right now. Also, briefly, I want to mention that today, we got news that weighed on the market somewhat. Although it's technically just expectations for right now, economists at Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, and JP Morgan think that we could see some serious downward revisions in job numbers. Economists at Goldman think we could even see downward revisions of up to 1 million jobs. So while technically these are just estimates for now, it is important to keep an eye on these revisions, because if we get some major downward revisions for job numbers, then market participants could start worrying about a potential recession again. Looking ahead at NVIDIA earnings next week on Wednesday, August 28th. I'm not a financial advisor, and so of course I'm not going to tell you what to do. That being said, I think it is important to have a very clear understanding of what type of position you are holding prior to earnings being released. Is this a long-term investment that you intend to hold for multiple years? Or is this a short-term trade? Personally, if I'm holding a long-term position that I intend to hold for multiple years into the future, then I do not prefer to sell ahead of earnings. I would rather hold through earnings, take some time to digest the results of the earnings report, and as long as the company is still making great progress forward and there are no significant signs of slowing growth, then I have no reason to sell. It's that simple. On the other hand, if this is a short-term trade, then that is a more complex situation. Again, I cannot tell you what to do because I am not a certified financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. That being said, I typically would not hold a short-term trade going into earnings because I do not know what the results will be, and that is too much of a risk for me. With that being said, NVIDIA is expected to report a very strong quarter, and they are expected to increase forward-looking guidance. So this is a unique situation where I personally might consider holding at least a portion of my trading position going into earnings. Here is a thought to consider. This is not a binary situation. You don't have to hold 100% of your position through earnings, and you don't have to sell 100% of your position before earnings. If you wanted to, you could break it up just in case. Let's say hypothetically I bought NVIDIA as a short-term trade back during the early August lows, and now that position is up 30% or so. If that's the case, then I don't think there's anything wrong with taking some risk off the table and taking some profits just in case. But again, that's just my personal opinion, and I am not a financial advisor. This is just part of my thought process going into earnings. I think the main thing is to have a clear understanding as to what type of position this is. Is this a long-term investment or a short-term trade? Once you have a clear answer to that question, then it will make the decision-making process much easier. And of course, if you need help for your specific situation, then consider reaching out to a certified financial advisor who can help you with your unique circumstance. Now, I'll be completely honest. I don't know what the future holds for NVIDIA, especially in the short term, because anything could happen. Long term, though, I am bullish on the future of NVIDIA as more hyperscalers like Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, Google, Tesla, and more all increase capex spending on AI by billions of dollars. If Blackwell is delayed, then that does not really concern me regarding the long-term future of NVIDIA. If Blackwell is delayed, then NVIDIA can simply sell more H100 GPUs in the interim because demand is so great right now, and they would likely just guide higher for future quarters in which they expect Blackwell to ship in volume. And sure, at some point growth will likely slow, as this is a recurring trend whenever there is a new breakthrough technological advancement. For now, though, demand for NVIDIA's products is strong and growing, as the largest companies in the world are practically waiting at NVIDIA's doorstep for the latest release of their products. With all of that being said, I hope you're all having a great day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.